The scraping of metal against glass sounded less than an inch from my ear. The heater was blasting at full power, yet I was shaking from the cold. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't banging on the window. He simply pressed his face against the glass, leaving a cloudy patch of breath, and slowly ran the blade of my own hunting knife along the rubber seal of the door. The nearest town was about 40 miles away. On my phone screen the words, "No service," glowed faintly. Suddenly he stopped, leaned closer to the window, and silently formed 3 words with his lips. This is 3 true, terrifying stories about people stranded on the side of the road. Never stopped to help. I worked as a night courier for a private medical laboratory. My job was to transport blood plasma and rare medications between regional hospitals. It was routine work, long nighttime drives along empty highways, thermoses filled with strong coffee, and podcasts playing through my headphones. I liked the job for its isolation. No supervisor hovering over your shoulder. Just you and the endless gray ribbon of asphalt. That night I was driving along US Route 2, cutting through a remote stretch of forest. It was late November. There was still no snow, but the temperature had already dropped below freezing, and the road was coated with a thin layer of black ice. I was driving a company vehicle, a Ford Transit cargo van, the kind with a solid steel partition separating the cab from the cargo area. In the partition there was a small sliding hatch, but I always kept it locked with the latch. Around 2 in the morning I passed an old gas station that had clearly been abandoned for years. On the shoulder, directly beneath a rusted street lamp, a dark sedan was parked. Its hood was up, hazard lights blinking. Next to the car stood a man in a bulky winter jacket, waving his arms energetically to get my attention. Company policy strictly forbade picking up hitchhikers or stopping anywhere outside approved locations. I slowed slightly, glanced at the figure in the jacket, and drove past. In the rearview mirror I saw the man lower his arms and simply watch my van disappear down the highway. There was no anger in his posture, no desperation. Just a still silhouette standing in the cold. I turned the music up a little louder to drown out the creeping sense of guilt. My brain immediately started rationalizing. He probably has a phone, someone else will stop, I'm transporting critical medical cargo. About 40 minutes passed. The scenery outside the windshield never changed, an endless wall of pine forest on both sides of the highway. I glanced at the GPS. A little over 60 miles left to my destination. Then my headlights caught the blinking orange glow of hazard lights in the darkness. A dark sedan was parked on the shoulder. Its hood was up. My stomach tightened. It was the same car. I couldn't mistake it, the left fender had a distinctive dent that I had noticed the first time. But that was impossible. There was no way the car could have passed me on that narrow highway without me noticing. This time no one was standing beside the vehicle. But on the asphalt, right beside the open driver's door, a person lay motionless. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving. But logic betrayed me. What if another car had hit him while he was trying to fix the engine? What if he was dying right now? I slammed on the brakes. The van skidded slightly on the ice before coming to a stop about 60 feet ahead of the sedan. I left the engine running and the headlights on, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out of the cab. The freezing air burned in my lungs. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low diesel rumble of my Ford's engine. I approached the body on the ground. The beam of my flashlight slid across the heavy jacket. "Hey! Can you hear me?" I shouted. No response. I stepped closer, crouched down, and grabbed the man by the shoulder to roll him onto his back. The jacket shifted easily. It was empty. There was no person inside. It was nothing more than an old coat stuffed tightly with rags and newspapers, arranged so that from a distance it would look like a body lying on the ground. The cold I felt in that moment had nothing to do with the weather. It was a trap. A stage set. At that exact second I heard the sharp clank of metal. The sound didn't come from the forest. It came from my van. It was the unmistakable click of the sliding side door of the cargo compartment opening. I dropped the jacket and sprinted toward the vehicle. The side door was wide open. I shined my flashlight inside. Among the insulated medical containers there was no one. I slammed the door shut, jumped into the driver's seat, locked the central locking system, and floored the gas pedal. The van lurched forward, its studded tires grinding against the ice. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I checked the mirrors, expecting to see someone chasing me. But there was nothing behind me except darkness. After about 5 minutes the panic began to fade. I convinced myself I had gotten away in time. Whoever had been hiding in the woods must have been planning to loot the cargo compartment, but I had scared him off. I was safe. I reached for my thermos to pour some coffee. That's when I smelled it. A sharp odor. The smell of damp wool, stale sweat, and cheap tobacco. The cab of my van usually smelled only of coffee and air freshener. This smell was foreign. And it was getting stronger. Slowly, I raised my eyes to the rearview mirror. The small sliding hatch in the metal partition, the one separating the cab from the cargo area, was slightly open. I knew for a fact that I had locked it before leaving the depot. The latch could only be opened from the cargo side. In the narrow crack, within the pitch-black darkness of the cargo hold, I saw a faint glimmer. A reflection. Light from the dashboard, catching in a human eye. He hadn't stayed behind on the road. He had climbed inside the van while I was running back toward it. My speed was around 70 miles per hour. An icy highway. I couldn't just slam the brakes, we would spin off the road and flip. My phone was on the passenger seat, but there was no signal in this area. I stared into the mirror, unable to look away. The gap in the hatch slowly widened. The small door slid open. I heard heavy, rasping breathing. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice trembled, sounding weak and pathetic. There was no answer. Suddenly a hand appeared from the darkness. It wore a dirty fingerless glove. The hand reached toward my throat. I jerked the steering wheel sharply to the right. The van swerved violently. The hand missed and slammed into the back of my seat. The man in the cargo hold lost his balance and crashed onto the metal floor with a loud bang. That gave me 1 second. Ahead, I spotted a sign, a gravel road leading to some small rural settlement. I didn't brake. I simply turned the wheel. The van shot off the highway, plowed through a ridge of snow, and became instantly stuck in a deep drift. The impact was violent. The airbag exploded into my face, knocking the breath out of me and leaving me disoriented for a moment. Without wasting a second, I slammed my shoulder into the door, stumbled out into the snow, and ran toward the highway, using the trees as cover. I ran until I saw the headlights of an approaching semi-truck. The driver stopped, and we called the police using his CB radio. The police arrived about an hour later. The van was still there. The side door was open. No one was inside. None of the medical supplies had been stolen. The detective later showed me footage from my own dash camera, the one pointed toward the interior of the cab. After I ran away, the man didn't leave the vehicle immediately. On the recording you can see a large man in filthy clothes climbing into the driver's seat. Instead of searching for valuables or keys, he simply sits there. He sat in my seat for exactly 40 minutes, staring directly into the camera lens with a faint smile. Then, 1 minute before the headlights of the truck appeared on the road, he slowly stepped out into the snowstorm. I never worked night routes again. But sometimes, when I get into my personal car, I catch a phantom smell. Damp wool. And cheap tobacco. I was driving my old Toyota Camry across the dry plains of New Mexico. It was the trip back home after being expelled from college. My mood was terrible, and I barely had any money left. The air conditioner in the car had broken a year earlier, so I was driving with the windows down, swallowing hot, dusty air. The highway was completely empty. Nothing but cracked asphalt, sunburned grass stretching to the horizon, and a shimmering heat haze trembling in the distance. At the only gas station within 60 miles, I filled the tank completely. While I was paying at the register, a guy walked up to my car. He looked about 25. Regular jeans, a faded t-shirt, and a heavy canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey, man, could you give me a ride to the Interstate 10 junction?" he asked when I came back outside. His voice was calm, almost a little tired. "I've been stuck here for like 3 hours. Nobody's stopping." I looked him over. Nothing suspicious. Just an ordinary guy. Maybe a student, maybe a drifter. I still had about 8 hours of driving ahead of me, and some company sounded like a good idea to keep me from falling asleep. "Sure," I said with a nod. He tossed the backpack onto the floor by the passenger seat and buckled up. We pulled back onto the highway. At first I tried to start a conversation. I asked where he was coming from, what he did for a living. But the guy turned out to be extremely quiet. His answers were short. "Yeah. No. Sometimes." After about 20 minutes I gave up and just turned on the radio. An hour passed. The sun was beginning to set, painting the plains in deep blood-red colors. Inside the car a heavy, suffocating silence settled. That's when I started noticing strange things. First, the way he was sitting. He sat absolutely motionless, his hands folded neatly on his knees. He wasn't looking out the window. He wasn't watching the road. His eyes were fixed straight ahead. On the plastic glove compartment. Then he reached up and slowly adjusted the rearview mirror so that it pointed toward the back seat of my car. The back seat was empty. "Hey, I actually need that mirror to see the road," I said irritably, and I turned it back. He didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. 10 minutes later I caught movement from the corner of my eye. He slowly raised his hand again and turned the mirror toward the back seat. "What are you doing?" I asked, my irritation turning into anger. He slowly turned his head toward me. His face was completely expressionless. "Checking," he said quietly. "Checking what?" "There's nobody back there." "Not yet," he replied. Then he turned his gaze back to the glove compartment. A cold ripple ran down my spine. I decided the guy was just strange. Maybe high on something. I needed to drop him off as soon as possible. Then my eyes drifted to the backpack lying at his feet. From the thick canvas fabric, onto the rubber floor mat, a dark, thick liquid was slowly seeping out. It gathered into a small puddle, and in the confined space of the car a sweet, metallic smell began to spread. The smell of iron. The smell of rust. My brain refused to accept what I was seeing. I tried convincing myself it was just a leaking bottle of juice. Or maybe motor oil. But my survival instinct was screaming that I was trapped inside a car with a psychopath. "Listen," I said, trying to sound casual, "I need to stop for the bathroom. There's a roadside diner coming up. I'll pull over for a couple minutes." Ahead of us I could already see the shape of an old concrete building with a faded sign that read, "Highway 24 Diner." A couple of semi-trucks were parked beside it. "Okay, Andrew," he said. My heart skipped a beat. I had never told him my name. My driver's license was inside the center armrest, completely out of sight. How did he know? I parked near the diner entrance, turned off the engine, and took the keys with me. "Be right back," I said, stepping out of the car. He remained inside, sitting exactly the same way, staring straight ahead. I walked into the diner. Behind the counter stood a heavy-set woman wearing an apron. Only one customer sat inside, a truck driver at the far table. I approached the counter, my hands shaking. "Please call the police," I whispered to the woman. "There's a crazy guy in my car. Something's leaking out of his backpack. Blood, or something like that." The woman frowned, wiped her hands on her apron, and glanced out the window. "Which car, honey?" she asked. I turned around. The parking lot was empty. My Toyota was gone. "What?" "I just parked it. I took the keys," I said, patting my pockets. The keys were still there. The truck driver, overhearing the conversation, walked over to the window. "I saw your car take off, kid," he said. "That guy just slid into the driver's seat, hot-wired it in about 3 seconds, and peeled out. Looked like a professional." Relief mixed with panic. He had stolen my car, but at least I was alive. The truck driver, whose name was Mike, offered to drive me to the nearest state police checkpoint, about 25 miles down the highway. I agreed. We climbed into his massive semi-truck. I drank some water and tried to calm down while Mike told a few stories from the road to distract me. Night had fallen completely. The truck's headlights carved tunnels of light through the darkness of the empty highway. About half an hour later Mike began slowing down. "Hey, take a look," he said, pointing ahead. "Isn't that your ride?" On the shoulder of the road, with no lights on, stood my Toyota. The trunk was wide open. Mike reached for the turn signal, preparing to pull over. "Let's stop. See what he ditched in there." "No!" I shouted so loudly that Mike flinched. "Don't stop. Hit the gas." "What the hell, kid? That's your stuff back there." "Hit the gas, damn it." Mike looked at my pale face and slammed the accelerator. The semi roared past my car without slowing. In the split second when our headlights illuminated the shoulder, I saw him. He hadn't abandoned the car. He was standing directly behind the open trunk. In his hands was the same heavy canvas backpack. And he was staring straight at the passing truck. He had been waiting for me to come back for the car. He had set up an ambush. We made it to the state police station. Officers sent a patrol car back to the location of my vehicle. They found it exactly where we had seen it. The ignition had been ripped out completely. Wires hung loose from the steering column. The trunk was empty. All of my belongings were gone. But when the detective lifted the false floor panel where the spare tire was stored, he found something else. The compartment was filled to the top with driver's licenses, passports, and Polaroid photographs of sleeping people. There were dozens of them. And lying neatly on top of the pile were my own driver's license, the one he had taken from the center armrest. I never saw my car again. And every time someone says my name, I remember that calm, tired voice inside the silent car. I work as a survey engineer. Many of my job sites are deep in the backwoods, places you can only reach by rough logging roads. That fall I was driving back from a timber survey site toward civilization. It was late evening. Freezing rain was pouring down, turning the dirt road into a slick mess of mud. My heavy Chevy Tahoe crawled forward slowly, its headlights barely cutting through the wall of rain. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept for almost 24 hours, and all I could think about was a hot shower and a soft bed in a motel in the nearest county town, still about 3 hours away. My work backpack lay on the passenger seat, and in the cup holder was my hunting knife. I had used it to slice an apple a couple of hours earlier and forgotten to put it back in the glove compartment. When my headlights caught the silhouette of someone walking along the roadside, I thought at first my eyes were playing tricks on me. There were no towns here. No houses. Just forest stretching for dozens of miles in every direction. It was a woman. She was walking without an umbrella, without a hood, wearing only a light windbreaker that was completely soaked and clung tightly to her body. She didn't even turn toward the headlights or try to flag me down. She simply kept walking forward through the pouring rain. I pulled alongside her and rolled down the window. An icy gust of wind burst into the cabin. "Hey! What are you doing out here?" I shouted. "Get in the car, you're going to freeze out here." She stopped. Slowly turned her head. Her hair was plastered across her face, and her lips were blue from the cold. Without saying a word, she walked to the passenger door, pulled the handle, and climbed into the seat, pushing my backpack back toward the rear seat. "How did you end up out here?" I asked, turning the heater to full blast. She didn't answer. She was shaking so badly her teeth were rattling. Wrapping her arms around herself, she stared straight through the windshield. "Car broke down," she finally forced out. Her voice sounded hoarse and lifeless. "My husband went to get help." I didn't want to wait. It sounded reasonable. But something about it scratched at the back of my mind. If you're freezing inside a car, you don't walk alone through a storm down a muddy road. You wait. I tried angling the heater vents toward her. "Don't," she said sharply, sliding closer to the door. "I'm fine." We continued down the road. The rain intensified. I focused on driving, trying to keep the SUV from sinking into the deep ruts. About 15 minutes later I noticed a faint glow in my rearview mirror. A vehicle was behind us. It looked like a large SUV or pickup. The strange part was that it was driving without headlights. I could only see it when it tapped its brakes, and the red glow of the brake lights briefly illuminated its massive grille. "You don't happen to know who that is behind us, do you?" I asked. The woman didn't turn around. She pulled an old flip phone from her pocket. The dim screen lit up the dark interior of the car. She quickly typed a message and pressed send. "Probably logging trucks," she said indifferently. "But logging trucks don't drive without headlights. And they don't maintain a perfect distance of 15 yards, copying every move you make." I decided to test my theory. I pressed the gas, accelerating to a dangerous speed for that road. The pickup behind us accelerated too. I slammed the brakes just before a deep puddle. The pickup slowed down at the exact same moment, still without turning on its headlights. It was following us. Panic began rising in my chest. I glanced at the woman. She was completely calm now. She wasn't shivering anymore. She was simply staring at the phone screen, waiting for a reply. "They're following us," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "I'm going to speed up. Try to lose them." I gripped the wheel and floored the accelerator. The Tahoe roared forward, spraying mud in all directions. We flew into a long curve. The vehicle fishtailed violently, but I managed to correct it. I looked into the mirror. We had lost them. Behind us there was only darkness. No red lights. "Looks like we lost them," I said with relief. "We're safe." The woman slowly turned her head and looked at me. There was no fear in her eyes. Only a cold, empty stillness. "They're not following you," she said quietly. "They're following my tracker." Before I could even process her words, she suddenly yanked the handbrake. At 40 miles per hour on slick mud, it was catastrophic. The SUV lost control instantly. The world outside the windows turned into a spinning carousel of black trees and gray mud. The vehicle slid off the road, slammed into the trunk of a fallen tree, and the engine died. My body jerked violently against the seatbelt. My ears rang. I heard the click of the central locks. The woman opened her door. She slipped out into the pouring rain. I tried to grab her jacket but missed. A second later the road ahead of my hood was blocked by that same pickup. It emerged from the darkness and switched on its blinding high beams, flooding my cabin with harsh white light. The woman walked to the pickup, opened the passenger door, and climbed inside. I was left alone. The engine was dead. Instinctively I hit the door lock button. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the silent cabin. 2 large men stepped out of the pickup. They weren't in a hurry. They walked toward my vehicle slowly, casually, despite the heavy rain. I frantically turned the ignition key. The starter whined weakly, but the engine wouldn't catch. Come on, start," I shouted, slamming my fist against the steering wheel. One of the men stopped beside my window. I looked at him. His face was hidden beneath a deep hood. Instinctively I reached for the cup holder to grab my hunting knife. The cup holder was empty. The woman had taken it before jumping out of the car. The man outside the window raised his hand. My knife was clutched between his fingers. The scraping of metal against glass sounded an inch from my ear. The heater was blasting at full power, yet I was shaking with cold. He didn't shout. He didn't bang on the window. He simply pressed his face against the glass, leaving a foggy patch of breath, and slowly dragged the blade of my own knife along the rubber window seal. The nearest town was nearly 40 miles away. On my phone screen glowed the words, "No service." Suddenly he stopped. He leaned closer to the window and silently formed 3 words with his lips. "Open the door." I pressed myself back into the seat, realizing the seal would give way in seconds and he would simply force the glass inward. The second man was walking around the back of the SUV, checking the trunk. It was over. The trap had closed. I was the bait, caught by my own sympathy. And then the forest suddenly lit up with yellow light. The ground trembled. From around the bend came the thunder of diesel engines as a convoy of 3 fully loaded logging trucks rolled onto the road. Their roof-mounted lights cut through the rain like giant floodlights. The man at my window recoiled instantly. He glanced at the trucks, then back at me. He spat on the glass, turned around, and sprinted back toward the pickup. The second man jumped into the truck bed. The pickup roared away, spraying fountains of mud, disappearing into the darkness before the first logging truck even reached my SUV. The truck drivers helped pull my vehicle out of the ditch and get the engine running again. I drove behind their convoy all the way to the county town, barely able to feel my hands or feet. Later, at the motel, while gathering my things from the passenger seat, I found the old flip phone the woman had been using. She must have dropped it when she jumped out of the SUV. It wasn't locked. I opened the "Sent Messages" folder. The last text she had sent, the one she typed at the exact moment I thought we had escaped the pursuit, contained a single sentence. "The load is heavy. Doors not locked. Take him at the turn." I think about that night often. I remember her soaked figure walking along the roadside. If you were driving down a dark, empty road in the middle of a freezing rainstorm and saw a woman out there, shivering and alone, would you stop? Snow slammed against the windshield so hard that the wipers scraped helplessly across the ice, struggling to keep the glass even partially clear. The engine of my sedan had just died. We were stranded in the middle of a completely empty highway about 25 miles from the nearest town. The temperature inside the car was dropping fast. I stared at the dashboard, trying to understand why the ignition had suddenly cut out, when I heard it. The sound of a zipper slowly opening. The passenger I had picked up 10 minutes earlier sat perfectly still, but his right hand was buried deep inside the gym bag resting on his lap. I glanced toward the rearview mirror. In the dim light of a distant highway lamp, I saw his face. He was no longer shivering from the cold. He was staring directly at my neck. In the silence of the cabin, a distinct metallic click echoed. These are 3 true scary stories about hitchhikers. At the time, my job was transporting commercial vehicles. That year I was driving empty Ford Transit cargo vans from regional branches back to the company's headquarters in Chicago. It was routine work. You get into an empty vehicle, tune the radio, buy a coffee at a gas station, and then drive for 14 straight hours. I was used to the solitude. In fact, I liked it. It was late October. I was driving along a long stretch of interstate, and the clock was approaching 2 in the morning. The road was perfectly straight, surrounded by dense forest on both sides. There were almost no cars. Only the occasional semi-truck passing in the opposite direction. I stopped at a 24-hour gas station to stretch my legs and fill the tank. That's where I saw him. He looked to be about 30 years old, wearing a clean but light jacket that clearly wasn't warm enough for the weather. He stood near the entrance to the convenience store with a small backpack, drinking coffee from a paper cup. When I stepped up to the register, he started talking to me. His voice was calm and polite. He said his bus had broken down in the previous town and he was trying to get to a hospital in the state capital because his mother had been admitted to the ICU. He needed to travel roughly 200 miles along the same route I was driving. I never pick up hitchhikers. That's both a company rule and my personal rule. But that night I was tired, and I needed someone to talk to so I wouldn't fall asleep behind the wheel. His story sounded believable, and nothing about his appearance triggered any alarm. So I nodded. For the first half hour we drove in relative silence. He asked the usual questions: where I was from, where I was headed, how long I had been driving professionally. I answered briefly, keeping my eyes on the road. He seemed like the perfect passenger. Quiet. Not intrusive. The strange part started during the second hour of the trip. We passed a sign pointing toward a small town off the highway. The guy suddenly said, "My mom always loved walking around here when we visited my grandmother. It's a shame she never got to see me graduate from college." I frowned slightly but kept my eyes on the road. At the gas station he had said he was rushing to see his mother in intensive care. Now he was speaking about her in the past tense. I assumed it was just a slip of the tongue from stress or exhaustion. I asked, "Which hospital are we heading to?" "Mercy General." He went silent. The silence lasted about 10 seconds. Then he answered, "Yeah. Mercy." But something had changed in his tone. The softness was gone. The pleading note had disappeared. His voice sounded flat now. Mechanical. I felt the first sharp stab of unease. The cabin of the van suddenly felt very small. There was no partition between us. Behind our seats stretched a huge empty metal cargo compartment. I shot him a quick glance. He wasn't looking at the road. He was watching my hands on the steering wheel. Then his eyes shifted toward the ignition. "Do you have a family?" he suddenly asked. "A wife and 2 kids," I lied. "I actually live alone." "That's good," he said slowly. "People need someone waiting for them. Otherwise no one starts looking." My hands tightened on the wheel. I began analyzing the situation. We were traveling about 60 miles per hour. Dark forest surrounded us. No signal. No towns within 25 miles. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a faint glow. He had taken out his phone. But he wasn't calling anyone. He wasn't texting. The screen was almost completely dark except for a small blinking dot. It was a map application. But the zoom level was strange. He wasn't looking at a route to the city. He was studying a detailed topographic map of the exact area we were driving through. "In about a mile there's a turn to the right," he said. "Take it." "I don't need to turn. The highway goes straight. It's faster that way. The road's better. Turn." His voice had become commanding. I glanced at the navigation screen on my dashboard. There was no road on the right. Just an old logging trail disappearing deep into the forest. "I'm not leaving the route," I said firmly. He didn't reply. Instead, He slowly reached down toward the backpack resting at his feet. I understood immediately that I couldn't let him open that bag. My mind started working with frightening clarity. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten him. I pretended to give in. "All right," I said evenly. "But I need to slow down first. My brakes act up if I hit them too hard." I gradually lifted my foot off the gas. 55. 50. 45. In the rearview mirror I suddenly saw headlights. A vehicle was approaching quickly from behind. My passenger also glanced at the side mirror. For a second, his attention shifted away from the backpack. That was my only chance. I slammed on the brakes and jerked the wheel toward the shoulder at the same time. The van fishtailed violently. My passenger wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He flew forward and slammed his shoulder hard into the dashboard, dropping the backpack. The van came to a stop in a cloud of dust and gravel. I didn't wait for him to recover. I yanked the handle of his door open, shoved my full weight against him, and pushed him out of the vehicle. He fell into the mud. I slammed the door shut, instantly hit the lock button, and floored the accelerator. In the mirror I saw him get to his feet. He didn't look angry. He didn't look confused. He just stood on the roadside, calmly watching me drive away. And the vehicle whose headlights I had seen behind us slowed down next to him. I drove straight to the nearest state trooper station and told them everything. The officers searched the van. His backpack was still lying on the passenger side floor. They opened it in front of me. There were no clothes inside. No documents. Only a roll of heavy reinforced duct tape, a thick coil of rope, a fixed blade knife, and several plastic zip ties. He wasn't going to see his mother. And he never planned to make it to the city. I thought the worst was already behind me. People say lightning doesn't strike the same place twice. But 2 years later something happened that made me give up night driving forever. By then I had changed jobs. I was working for an IT company, and my schedule was irregular. That Friday night I was driving back to the city from a friend's country house. A heavy downpour was pounding the road. The windshield wipers were running at full speed, but the visibility was still close to zero. The road wound through low hills, bending sharply around the slopes. On one of those tight curves, illuminated only by my headlights, I saw an old sedan pulled over on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. The hood was raised. Standing beside the car, under the pouring rain, was a woman. She wasn't waving for help. She just stood there, arms wrapped around her shoulders. I drove past her. Every instinct in my head was screaming, "Don't stop." But my conscience started gnawing at me from the inside. A woman. Alone. On an empty road in the middle of a storm. I slowed down, checked the mirror, sighed heavily, and shifted into reverse. I rolled down the passenger side window. "Need help?" I shouted over the roar of the rain. She nodded, opened the door, and quickly climbed into the passenger seat. She smelled like wet wool and cheap tobacco. Her hair clung to her face in damp strands. "Thank you," she said quietly. The car died. "Could you give me a ride to the gas station? It's about 20 minutes from here." "No problem," I said, putting the car into gear. We started moving again. I turned the heater all the way up so she could warm up. I tried to make conversation. I asked what had happened to her car. She answered briefly. The belt snapped. After that she didn't say another word. She sat unnaturally straight, staring straight ahead at the road. Water dripped from her jacket onto my seat, but she didn't even try to shake it off. 5 minutes later I noticed her hands. She was holding a phone on her lap. The screen was off, but her thumb kept tapping some kind of rhythm against the back of the phone. Tap. Tap tap. Tap. I glanced in the rearview mirror. There was no one behind us. Just complete darkness. "Did you call a tow truck?" I asked. She didn't turn her head. "Yes. They're waiting at the gas station." That made no sense. Tow trucks don't wait at gas stations. They go to the broken-down car. A cold sensation crept down my spine. I checked the rearview mirror again. Far behind us, through the curtain of rain, a pair of headlights appeared. They were moving very fast. Too fast for that kind of weather. I shifted my gaze toward the woman. Her phone screen suddenly lit up. A message had arrived. I managed to catch only a single word on the lock screen. "Speed?" She quickly typed the number 80 and sent it. My heart skipped a beat. She wasn't calling a tow truck. She was sending our coordinates and speed to someone behind us. I looked in the mirror again. The headlights were closing in rapidly. It was a large SUV. It caught up to me and stuck to my tail, barely a few yards behind my bumper. It didn't try to pass. It just followed closely, blasting me with its high beams. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. She turned her head toward me. In the glare of the headlights behind us, her face looked like a pale mask. "Slow down," she said. It wasn't a request. The SUV behind us honked. A long, drawn-out blast of the horn. I realized we were approaching a bridge over the river. The road narrowed there, and there was no shoulder. If I slowed down, the SUV would pin me against the guardrail. They would box me in. Instead of braking, I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. My old car roared. The tires briefly lost traction on the wet asphalt, but then the car surged forward. The speedometer needle climbed toward 75 miles per hour. The woman jerked suddenly. She lunged toward the steering wheel. "Brake, you idiot," she shouted. I drove my elbow into her chest, forcing her back into the seat. My left hand clamped down on the wheel while my right hand felt for the seatbelt latch on her side and hit the release button. The belt snapped free. We blasted across the bridge. The SUV behind us lost some distance on the slick section of road. Ahead, an illuminated intersection with a roundabout came into view. I started braking hard. 60. 50. 30. The woman tried to grab my jacket, but I slammed the brakes so hard the ABS kicked in. The car shuddered violently. When the speed dropped to about 15 miles per hour, I reached over, yanked her door handle open, and shoved her hard with my shoulder. She tumbled out onto the wet asphalt, rolling across the pavement. I didn't stop. I ran the red light at the intersection and drove all the way to the city without slowing down, ignoring every traffic camera on the way. The SUV didn't follow me. Later, at home, after the shaking finally stopped, I inspected the inside of the car. There was a puddle of water on the passenger seat. And something else. On the floor mat lay a small black key fob that must have fallen from her pocket during the struggle. There was a button on it. I showed it to a mechanic friend of mine. It was a GPS signal jammer. If I had reached that bridge and slowed down like she wanted, my car would have disappeared from every tracking system. Forever. Some things in life simply cannot be predicted. No matter how careful you try to be, sometimes a situation leaves you with no choice. The third story happened last winter. I was driving home from my shift at a manufacturing plant. A heavy snowstorm was raging outside. The wind was howling, and the snowfall was so thick that visibility was barely 30 feet. I had taken an old bypass road because the main highway had been closed after a serious accident. The road looked like a narrow corridor carved between towering snowbanks. Snow was falling so densely that it formed a solid white wall in front of the headlights. I was driving slowly, about 25 miles per hour, peering into the darkness. And suddenly, right in the center of my lane, a figure emerged from the blizzard. A person stood there with his back turned toward me. He wasn't waving for help. He wasn't signaling. He was simply standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes. The car slid across the ice and came to a stop barely 3 feet from him. The man slowly turned around. He was wearing a heavy winter coat, with a knit cap pulled low over his eyes. He walked up to the passenger side window and knocked. I lowered the window just a couple of inches. "Brother, help me out," he said. His voice was hoarse and uneven. "My car went off the road about 3 miles back. I've been walking for an hour. I'm freezing to death. Could you give me a ride to the gas station?" I looked at his face. It was red from the cold, frost clinging to his eyebrows. The temperature outside was well below zero. Leaving him out there would have meant killing him. I unlocked the door. He climbed inside. He was carrying a large, heavy gym bag. Instead of placing it at his feet, he set it directly on his lap and wrapped both arms around it. "Thanks, man. I won't forget this," he said, his teeth chattering. We started moving again. The heater was working well, filling the cabin with warm air. I asked him where exactly he had gone off the road. "Back there somewhere, around the bend," he said vaguely, waving his hand. About 5 minutes passed. The snow on his clothes began melting. And that's when I noticed the first strange detail. I looked down at his boots. They were ordinary winter boots. But they were completely dry. There was no snow on them. No slush. No chunks of ice. If he had really walked 3 miles down an unplowed road during a blizzard, his boots should have been soaked through. He hadn't been walking. He had been waiting. Then I noticed the smell. As the interior of the car warmed up, something from his bag began to stink. It was a sharp chemical odor mixed with something sweet and nauseating. It reminded me of bleach and old burlap. "What's in the bag?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Tools," he answered shortly. His tone had changed. His teeth were no longer chattering. I glanced at him. He sat completely still. His right hand was buried inside the half-open bag. Suddenly the engine coughed. The RPM dropped. I pressed the gas pedal, but it felt soft and unresponsive. The car began losing speed. "What the hell?" I muttered. We rolled forward another 100 yards before the engine died completely. The headlights dimmed. We came to a stop in the middle of an empty road. The temperature inside the car immediately began to fall. I reached toward the ignition key to try starting the engine again. "Don't," he said quietly. I froze. Snow hammered against the windshield so hard that the wipers scraped helplessly against the ice. We sat there in the darkness. I could hear only the wind howling outside and his slow, steady breathing. Then came the sound. The zipper of the bag being opened wider. Out of the corner of my eye I glanced toward the rearview mirror. In the faint glow of the dashboard lights I saw his face. He was no longer pretending to be a freezing driver. He was staring directly at my neck. A faint smile played on his lips. Almost sympathetic. In the silence of the cabin, there was a sharp metallic click. My brain switched to pure instinct. I didn't wait to see what he had taken out of the bag. With my left hand I yanked open my door, slammed it outward with my shoulder, threw myself into the snow, and ran. I didn't look back. I ran through the deep snow in total darkness until my lungs burned from the icy air. About 50 yards from the road, I dove into a thick patch of bushes and hid there. From that spot I watched my car. The passenger door opened. The man stepped out. He didn't try to search for me. He simply stood beside the car with the bag in his hand. A minute later, a black SUV emerged from the blizzard. The same vehicle that, as I later realized, had been driving ahead of us and must have dropped spikes or some kind of chemical agent onto the road to disable my car. The SUV stopped. The man climbed inside. Then they drove away. I walked through the snow until morning, until I finally came across a snowplow. My car was found 2 days later. It was still sitting in the same spot. But when the police searched the interior, they discovered something that made my hair turn gray overnight. The metallic click I had heard was not the sound of a switchblade. It was the sound of a stun gun. They had been testing it. And on the back seat of my car, hidden beneath the floor mat, was a thick plastic bag roughly the size of a human body. The smell of bleach from it hadn't faded even in the freezing cold. They didn't want to steal my car. They wanted to take what was inside it. Now every time I drive at night in the rain or snow and see someone standing on the shoulder, I remember that sound. That click in the darkness. And I keep driving. I know it's the right decision. But ask yourself something. Picture that night. A blizzard. An empty road. A man freezing to death. You see the desperation in his eyes. If you had been in my place, would you have stopped?